Nintendo has always, and to this day continues to dominate the handheld market. This is the story of the only system to seriously challenge any Game Boy. The Sega Game Gear. Released in 1991, just 2 years after the original Game Boy, this is the third handheld to feature a color screen. While Nintendo was committed to the proven and efficient monochrome display, NEC, Atari, and Sega risked everything on beautiful color. Unfortunately, the Atari Lynx lacked quality games, and the Turbo Express cost as much as a home console, because, well, for all intents and purposes, it was. You can't tell from looking at it, but inside it's sort of an upgraded Sega Master System. Unlike the Turbo Express's state-of-the-art and expensive hardware, Sega could offer their older 8-bit technology miniaturized at a reasonable retail price.
That's the reason why, in Europe and Brazil, you see a lot of similar games. Like such games as Sonic the Hedgehog right here was also released for the Sega Master System. It's the same exact game. The only difference is that the resolution was set differently. See, the thing is that in the Sega Game Gear version, the resolution has to be set at a different resolution. And also the Game Gear has a higher color palette as well. So pretty much they just adjusted those two things. Other than that, you got yourself a portable Master System in this thing. That's pretty much what they did with this Game Gear, pretty much. So that's the reason why I see a lot of games that were released for the Master System, such as Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic the Hedgehog 2. They even had a Master System version of Mortal Kombat, oddly enough. Even though this game didn't play the greatest, but it pulled off pretty good graphics for an 8-bit sprite. Pretty impressive, I must say.
As you can see here, it's really not all that much larger than an original Game Boy. It does weigh a little bit more, but not that much. It takes 6 batteries compared to the 4 needed for the Game Boy. It needs the extra batteries to run the backlit screen. I think it's much more comfortable to play thanks to its controller-like shape. There's a dial for volume and a dial for contrast. If the oldest handheld you've played is the Game Boy Advance, you might not know this, but LCD technology has come a long way since 1991. Getting just the right angle, contrast, and external light level was an art form. Those of us who grew up on the Game Boy and the Game Gear became experts at maximizing viewability. While the screen is bright and colorful, it suffers from the same motion blur effect as the Game Boy. Faster scrolling games compound this, and due to the color graphics, I think the ghosting is worse than on Game Boy. It doesn't ruin the experience, and back in the day, it was just accepted as the way that LCD screens worked. The Game Gear was never able to topple the Game Boy, and for good reason. It cost more and was a freaking battery vampire. So what if the games looked and played great? If you were spending all your allowance on batteries, you can't buy new games. Wikipedia claims it would last anywhere from 5 to 6 hours, compared to the Game Boy's 10 to 14. But I remember it seeming quite a bit worse than that. It could have been the generic batteries I used to buy at Payless, not the shoe store. Like most, I'd resort to using an AC adapter. Sure, it lets you play as long as you want, but only about 6 feet from the wall. The whole point of a handheld is to take it with you and play anywhere. I mean, if you're going to play at home, you might as well play on a Genesis. Today, however, if you're looking to collect, it's not an issue since I doubt you're going to be taking it on a road trip. Just think of it as a personal game machine instead of a handheld. Even though the Game Gear's library is smaller than the Game Boy's, Sega went out of their way to ensure nearly all of the best games got mini versions on their handheld. There are plenty of classics worth owning the system for if you're into retro gaming, and the system has a retro charm you don't have to be a Sega fan to appreciate. Now it's time for Kane's 2 Bits! 1. When you factor in the poor battery life, added to being just enough larger than the Game Boy to not fit in a standard adult pocket, you have a system that comes up short next to the technically inferior, but proven technology of the Game Boy. The color screen was ahead of its time, and in this case, it means Sega should have waited, like Nintendo did. 2. The games are still fun. It's sad that Sega lost its taste for portable gaming after the Game Gear. Sega was always innovative, and a hit handheld could have sustained them alongside the Saturn, and maybe, just maybe, saved them paired with the Dreamcast. Just thinking about it almost makes me cry. Almost. That's my 2 bits. If you have any thoughts or fond memories of the Game Gear, please leave a comment or video response. As always, I'm your humble 2-bit gamer. Thanks for watching.